What's up, guys? Hello, so Football Talk here, back with another divisional draft breakdown, where this time we'll be talking about the AFC East. As we've done for the first three groups of teams, I'll give a quick scouting report on every player selected, analyzing why the team made the pick, and how it coincides with the rest of the roster, including moves made earlier this offseason, talk about each class as a whole, and then at the end rank them against each other in terms of how they used the draft capital and how well they were able to execute a certain plan that they had. As always, if there were any trades during the draft process, we'll take a quick minute to talk about those, and if there are some picks used on established veteran players at some other point, we'll just quickly mention those and not take them into account really here. If you're looking for even more detailed draft breakdowns of specific players and undrafted free agents set to make an impact and a lot of other stuff, you can head over to my page also footballtalk.com. Link for that and all my social media outlets are in the video description, so check those out later. This might actually be a bit of a quick one today, since one team only made 4 selections and another one 7, but let's see how deep we get into my thoughts. Timestamps for each individual team and the divisional draft rankings are down below as well, but now let's get into these 4 teams, starting with the Buffalo Bills, who started the draft moving up a couple of spots from 25 with the Ravens in exchange for pick 130, just to make sure the Cowboys wouldn't take the guy or Baltimore themselves, as they went 23rd overall, Kaiir Elam, the cornerback out of Florida, 2nd round 63rd overall, James Cook, running back Georgia, 3rd round 89th overall, Terrell Bernard, linebacker Baylor, then in the 5th round 148th overall, Khalil Shakir, wide receiver Boise State, 3 6th round picks, Matt Araiza, punter San Diego State, Christian Benford, cornerback Villanova, Luke Tenuta, the offensive tackle out of Virginia Tech, and then finally in the 7th round, 231st overall, Baylon Spector, the linebacker out of Clemson. So at the top here with Elam, an impressive physical profile, 6'2", 195 pounds with good length and 4.39 speed. A guy that can really dictate route stems and not be boxed out in contested catch situation due to his size and physicality. Has one of the best track records in terms of pure coverage in the toughest conference in college football in the SEC. And you go back to the Alabama game, really an all-around excellent performance. There was one back shoulder fade where he got kind of antsy and drew a flag for pass interference, and another one where he missed the tackle. But overall, also in that area, pretty reliable, only missing 3 of 30 tackling attempts last season. He's not nearly as effective in off coverage and kind of tends to get grabby late, even if it's unnecessary, which I just mentioned with that back shoulder fade. Drew 7 flags for holding and pass interference last season in 10 games, and not quite has that physicality that he brings in coverage, also in run support. So he's kind of an interesting fit here for a zone-heavy scheme that does, however, want to squeeze down windows and make it tough for opposing quarterbacks to fit the ball into them. I like that they finally invested into their cornerback across from Trey White, and maybe we'll see more man coverage on 3rd downs, where the really good offenses are able to find ways to convert, find those open spaces. So that's going to be interesting to watch, but either way, he's a nice addition here for this defense. And then we get to James Cook, obviously the brother of Viking superstar running back Dalvin Cook. Similar to his brother, has that burst through the line of scrimmage that is just scary, that speed to win around the corner and defeat pursuit angles down the sideline. He was the yin to the steady yang of Samir White at Georgia. As more of the receiving option and big play guy in the pass game, I think he's the most natural receiver in this entire class in terms of being able to split him out wide and run by linebackers, also just catching an angle route and making defenders miss with the ball in his hands. So he's going to bring a dynamic element for them there. Simply doesn't have the type of build to be something like a workhorse back, as he actually never carried the ball more than 12 times in a game during his time at Georgia. And in pass pro, rather timid, kind of just sliding in front of guys and getting in the way rather than packing a punch and stopping their momentum there. The Bills don't really allow their running backs to touch the ball a whole lot, but when they do, they should make a real impact, and I think Cook has that skill set to deliver explosive plays, whether it's taking a draw, catching a screen pass, using him as a diverse piece in the passing game, moving around the formation. I think he's going to bring that offense an element that he haven't really had. And then Terrell Bernard, the linebacker at Baylor, a really downhill-oriented run defender and reliable tackle in space as well. In-zone coverage, very active communication, and is quick to pull the trigger once the ball's released to come up and make key stops for his defense. As well as a blitzer, excellent snap anticipation to time them up, whether it's in the run game to create negative plays or in the pass game closing in the quarterback and forcing him to kind of short on the pass. He is only 6'1", 225 pounds with just a 74-inch wingspan, and he does have very little experience in man coverage, But the biggest concern actually with him is durability, considering he's had foot, knee, and shoulder surgeries in college that have cost him time, or at least made him less effective when he was out there. I think he'll be a great understudy for Matt Milano, who can make an impact as a special teamer right away and a sub-package guy early on. And he kind of insures them for further injuries to Milano, which has been very hurtful in recent years. Then in Shakir in the 5th, I think they get one of the biggest steals of the whole draft. He was my 87th overall prospect. Has kind of some of those Keenan Allen qualities as a guy who can attack leverage and get defenders turned the wrong way, with kind of unorthodox step sequencing and unpredictable route running. He also shows great spatial awareness and has kind of the extra gear with the ball in his hands, along with being very slippery for people to put hands on. So he can be pretty tough to corral actually. But that lanky build that he has isn't necessarily optimal for primarily a slot receiver, and he basically never had to deal with press there at Boise State. A little too herky-jerky with the ball in his hands at times as well, instead of just making yards with it that are there in front of him. So still, like I said, one of the biggest steals in this draft, and while he did bring back Isaiah McKenzie for Buffalo, as well as sign Jamison Crowder on a veteran deal, I could see Shakir turn himself into that number 3 behind Diggs and Gabe Davis sooner rather than later and make a real impact for this team. Matt Araiza here to get him in the 6th. Punter, not really a high value position, but considering a couple of guys went in the 4th round already, this makes a lot of sense because in Buffalo they have one of the top scoring offenses, and now if their drives do stall, they can quickly flip the field with the guy that is called Punt God. Led the country last year with 51.2 yards per punt, only had 22 of 79 total returns, while also being second in terms of punts inside the opposing 20. So a guy that really helps them if they don't score or don't go for it, they can really boom it and make it tough for the opposing offense to really drive the ball in the defense across the length of the field. Benford, the corner, does well to disrupt receivers in the route stem with those long arms and has the swivelly hips to attach to his man. He's had absurd career production at Villanova with nearly 50 passes broken up and 7 interceptions in 2021 alone. Does have below average speed that wasn't really exposed at the FCS level, running a 4.52 in the 40. There are too many false turns and exaggerated leans, I would say, and in zone you see him drift kind of into no man's land at times. So they do take a shot here at a position that they needed to invest into, with a guy who's had monster ball production, so he in the 6th, even though there were a couple of guys that I have ranked higher, I can't really hate on it. Then with Tenuta on tape showing controlled active footwork to stay square to his rushers, and pretty solid in that regard, but only 32.5-inch arms at 6'7", which is a bit underwhelming. And also the athletic profile, nothing that's really inspiring to you. So probably not going to make it onto the active roster, but maybe a guy, if they have an injury, bring him on and as a backup can give you some solid snaps in a pinch. And then Bill Inspector was a team captain for the Clemson defense. Pretty athletic mover in space as a former safety and has that lateral agility to navigate around blockers. But he does lack size and length to really deal with contact straight on. So most likely going to be a special teams ace, and maybe in some sub packages at some point you do get him involved because he has that ability to move in space and make some sense here in certain third down packages. Other than Shakir in the 5th, I didn't look at any of the picks that Buffalo made as major steals or anything like that, but in correlation with the moves that they made already earlier in this offseason, bringing in Von Miller and Roger Saffold while re-signing some pieces, I believe this draft could help them push them over the top in the AFC. With the first 2 picks, they addressed the 2 biggest question marks on the team, I believe, which was a number 2 outside corner and a dynamic player out of the backfield. They secured themselves for another Milano injury with Bernard, seeing how the defense has fallen apart in the past when he got hurt. They obviously grabbed Shakir as this different type of receiver that they didn't really have there yet, who can help them move the chains on third downs. A true weapon at punter to flip the field and force opponents to drive the ball on the defense, and then some needed depth pieces late on day 3. I'm not in love with the class like some others that I've already discussed here, but I see a clear vision for how these players will help them in 2022 and beyond. So overall, I like what they did here. And that brings us to the next team here with the Miami Dolphins, who, as you can see, only made 4 selections. And of course, the reason they didn't select inside the top 100 was due to the Tyreek Hill trade. And only making those 4 selections, not that much of an impact they can make there, but they also nailed the undrafted free agent market so much that I want to mention at the end here quickly. So for the smallest class of this entire draft, 3rd round, 102nd overall, Channing Tindall, linebacker, Georgia. 4th round, 125th overall, Eric Ezukanma, the wide receiver out of Texas Tech. And then 2 7th round picks, 224th overall, Cameron Good, linebacker, California. And then 247th overall, Skylar Thompson, quarterback, Kansas State. Starting things off with Tyndall, a guy that has unreal pursuit speed from sideline to sideline and those 32.5-inch arms to keep blockers away from his frame, was often subbed onto the field for Quay Walker in passing situations, and you look at the numbers on 17 targets, surrendering only 72 yards last season, along with that incredible closing burst that he has as a blitzer, where he can really get into the face of quarterbacks, and if you get him as a free rusher, just closing in quickly and forcing quick throwaways, or also in some packages where you can let him run into people and set up other things. I think he's going to fit in that regard with that defense that is so much about putting pressure on the quarterback and overwhelming them with heavy pressure looks. Very uncommon here for a pick in this range. 0 career starts or passes defensed just because of how great that defense was and how many pieces he had at the linebacker spot. Doesn't yet understand how to really actually deconstruct blocks, and he does get his eyes locked in on the action in the backfield a little too much. But he's an elite athlete for the position and gives them a weapon alongside Jerome Baker on the second level, who can be used as a spy versus Josh Allen in those matchups, because even if they were able to cover the pieces in the passing game for the most part, Allen so many times has really punished them with his legs, and then along with that contribute as a pressure player for the remaining defensive coordinator Josh Boyer, where he can be really creative with him and be kind of a weapon in that regard for them. Then with Izukama, a guy that has easy acceleration off the ball at 6'3", 220 pounds, tracks the ball incredibly well and seems pretty unfazed by defenders trying to hold him back, as well as box them out effectively with that big body, the power to break through tackles, along with the strength and willingness to impose himself as a blocker, where a lot of time you saw him bury cornerbacks on the outside with that. He did run a severely limited route tree at Texas Tech, and the tape is just so tough to judge with the lackluster quarterback play, so you didn't see a whole lot of him other than run after catch and contested catches. He does telegraph his breaks a little too much, and you saw a lot of corners play off and inside shade on him to undercut routes just because they knew it was either going to be down the sideline or breaking inside. So he's going to have to diversify his route tree there. He does make some sense to complement a smaller, more explosive group of wide receivers, and you almost get him with the same draft capital that they picked up from New England in the Devontae Parker trade, as a cheaper replacement for him probably. Cameron Good unfortunately didn't study pretty good athletic testing and length, but I just can't speak on him in an educated fashion, so I won't really try here. Just adding depth to the linebacker spots and maybe with that speed covering kicks. Then Skylar Thompson, however, I did watch extensively and count me in as a fan. This guy has some of the most impressive pocket presence in this class, doesn't panic under pressure, and he can use subtle or sudden movement to set up clean platforms as a passer, has the arm to push the ball down the field, and the ability to zip passes into tight windows. And he's just a gamer when the lights go on, getting it done for his team, even though there weren't the greatest pieces around him all the time during his time at Kansas State. Sometimes he does act a little too much like a Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, which he doesn't quite have that kind of talent, obviously. There are some hero ball tendencies, and the two big things here for me, has an extensive injury history and will be a 25-year-old rookie, so that's probably why he went this late, even though he is an intriguing prospect. Obviously Tua is the guy for them right now in Miami, but I believe this guy can eventually start at some point in the league, and if Tua does get hurt again, I wouldn't be shocked if we see him surprise some people and become kind of a fan favorite if he does get onto the field and makes big plays. But it would be crazy to call for quarterback competition with a 7th rounder, just telling you that there's a lot of things to really like here with Thompson. So a very short list for Miami here, but I thought the names that they were able to acquire were pretty good. Tyndall is one of the craziest athletes for the linebacker position that we've ever seen, and he fits nicely into that defense. Ezukamba could be a cheap replacement for Devontae Parker. Good at least has that speed to help out covering kicks. And then Thompson, it's my biggest quarterback sleeper of this class. I think he can do a lot worse with those kind of draft picks in the end. Quickly about the undrafted free agents here that I mentioned at the top for Miami. They picked up Oregon safety Ron McKinley and Arizona State offensive tackle Kellen Diesch, who were 94th and 112th overall prospects for me. I talked about the piece on the undrafted free agents who will make an impact in 2022. You can find that on my page, also footballtalk.com, which the link for that is in my video description, like I already mentioned. And along with that, some other fun players like South Carolina running back Zaquandre White, who is this lightning in the bottle type of guy. So yeah, I won't include him in the draft ranking at the end, but I love what they did once the draft was actually wrapped up, and thought with the resources they had, they did pretty good. And that has us moving on to the New England Patriots, who started Thursday night with pick 21, which they moved back 8 spots from in exchange for picks 94 and 121, as the Chiefs decided to move up for Washington cornerback Trent McDuffie. And they certainly made some interesting selections here, to say the least, for the Patriots, which fittingly, the guy that they picked at 29th overall was a guy called Cole Strange, interior O-lineman out of UT Chattanooga. Then in the second round, 50th overall, Tyquan Thornton, wide receiver Baylor. Third round, 85th overall, Marcus Jones, cornerback Houston. 3 fourth rounders, with the first one here, Jack Jones, cornerback Arizona State. Pierre Strong, running back South Dakota State, and Bailey Zappi, quarterback Western Kentucky. Then in the 6th round, 3 more picks, Kevin Harris, running back South Carolina. Sam Roberts, interior D-lineman, Northwest Missouri State. Jason Hines, interior O-line with LSU. And then finally in the 7th round, 245th overall, Andrew Stuber, the offensive tackle / interior O-lineman out of Michigan. Kicking things up, the first rounder here, the Strange jokes have all been heard, and you can make fun of them all you want. I called Strange as Ricci as well, but I do like the player a lot. Had the 7th highest relative athletic score among guards over the last 25 years or so. Extremely smart, experienced player who can execute lead blocks as a puller or reach block read techniques in pretty impressive fashion. He excels with well-timed and placed strikes in pass pro, and overall you look at the numbers, only allowing 9 total pressures on 441 pass blocking snaps since 2020, so has been a super consistent player for his team. And at the Senior Bowl as well, certainly looked like he belonged there, moving into center to some degree and showing that he has that versatility there as well. Finding ways to get the job done and impressive scouts there, which started his kind of meteoric rise. Does look very small out there though, however, and won't really uproot guys out of the A-gaps as more of a power-oriented run scheme. He lacks some sand in the pants and has to shift his way too far out in front at times because of it, which can lead to some balance issues with guys being able to pull him off to the side. I don't love getting rid of Shaq Mason for a late round pick here and just getting a cheaper replacement if it costs you a first round pick in the process. I do believe that Strange will be a quality starter at guard for them for a long time, but I didn't necessarily love the process behind him, and I certainly thought that he was early here. The pick that I actually had a bigger problem with here though, Tyquan Thornton, 50th overall, which actually moved up 4 spots with the Chiefs once again in exchange for a 5th rounder. Obviously has that blazing 4.28 speed and can run by the whole defense without the ball or take a slant 75 yards to the house. I like the way that he addresses the football in terms of hand positioning and stuff like that, and he takes his blocking duty seriously. However, he does have a bad tendency of stepping backwards off the line, and he basically ran 4 routes at Baylor with a slant, post, fade, and every once in a while a stop route. And he was underwhelming in contested situations as well as after the catch, which is kind of disappointing considering the speed that he brings to the table. We're averaging just 3.1 yards after the catch in 2021. This was actually the selection that I had a bigger problem with, like I said, because while I do like Thornton, he brings a pretty narrow skill set to the table, and to me that's not necessarily worth a top 50 pick. We'll talk about maybe a little bit about the philosophical changes for this Patriots offense that we'll see, and I can see a role certainly for him as this guy on the backside of the zone run game where he can run those deep post routes and be a real threat for the defense, not being able to load up the box, but like I said, maybe just too much of a specific skill set that you might be able to find later in this draft as well. Then I'm going to kind of lump the 2 Jones brothers with each other, Marcus and Jack Jones. 2 pissed off 5'8" corners with tremendous click and close ability, have excellent ball skills, each of them really fly up the field versus screens, and really always play bigger than the size would indicate. However, they are more so drag tacklers, and you see them kind of get boxed out on multiple occasions just because of their lack of size, which is what really holds them back, because they were 2 of my personal favorites actually. Marcus Jones during his time at Houston, that ability, what he brings to the table, being one of the elite return men that we've seen coming out of college in a long time, with 9 career return touchdowns. That element was certainly part of the strategy here with Gunnar Olszewski, their primary return specialist, now in Pittsburgh. And then Jack Jones, formerly at USC, looked like a star player there, then had some troubles off the field before finally really establishing himself again as a player for Herm Edwards there at ASU. Interesting to see them go this route with those 2 smaller corners, and maybe we see more off-zone coverage from them, or they just take 2 gambles here in terms of guys that maybe can play in the slots, but actually both primarily played on the outside in college, so that's going to be interesting to see what they do defensively here. Then we get to Pierre Strong, a guy that can really press and stick his foot in the ground to punish the flow in wide zone plays. Hit 47 runs of 15 plus yards last season, which was tied for the most among all running backs in college football, with Michigan State's Kenneth Walker, who was a Heisman Trophy finalist for a long time. Strong was tied for the best 40 at the combine among running backs with a 4.37, so that kind of backs up that big playability that he brings to the table. He does lack size and the strength to truly break tackles, however, doesn't have the greatest change of direction, which is why there were plenty of negative runs on tape, just that ability to navigate in tight spaces. And as a receiver, averaged 0.4 yards less per catch than Rush last season, so that kind of tells you about this ability to play in space. Like I quickly mentioned here, with Cole Strange being better suited for an outside zone-based offense, and now you get Strong as this one-cut runner with big playability, we could see Belichick and company probably make somewhat of a philosophical transition here offensively to more of that outside zone-oriented lateral running schemes, and then play action shots off it, which Mac Jones is pretty good at. But then the next pick for that maybe doesn't make as much sense with Bailey Zappi, a tremendous senior campaign, broke Joe Burrow's previously set records for passing yards in nearly 6,000 and with 62 touchdowns. A guy that can really spread the field and work through progressions super quickly, but also actually led the country with 790 yards on deep passes, those who travel 20 plus yards. So he's not just somebody who can dump it underneath, but really finds those voids in the defense and can punish them. But he did work in a very quarterback-friendly offense there at Western Kentucky, where he brought his favorite receiver with him there from Houston Baptist, and we were kind of able to just keep the show going. He was under pressure on an absurdly low 12.5% of dropbacks. The arm talent is subpar, and not really being able to push the ball to the far hash, and also actually having a Hail Mary come up short when he was throwing it from midfield once last season. So there are certainly some limitations here. He's probably going to be a quality backup in this league for the next 10 years, but I'm just not sure if that's worthy of a 4th-round pick necessarily, just having selected Mac Jones last year. So maybe you want to get some veteran leadership in that room anyway. Not totally sure about that one. Then we get to Kevin Harris, who's an efficient runner with quality experience in a pretty versatile pro-style running scheme in South Carolina, runs with excellent pad level and can really pull himself out of wraps. In pass pro, approaches blitzer with good sink in his hips and has a sturdy base to take off some steam at the point of impact. So you like what he brings as this efficient in between the tackles runner and in pass pro, but he won't necessarily scale with his initial burst or the long speed. He caught just 36 career passes, so very unproven in that area, and there is a bit of an issue with the way that he addresses the football as a receiver, having to dive for it and not really being able to just catch it and keep going. This was a bit confusing to me since the Pats now will go 6 names deep at the running back spot, and they always kind of find these guys on the undrafted free agent market. So I know it's a 6th-round pick, but they still made 4 total selections here, and maybe there were more talented players on the board that would actually be able to help them right away. Then Sam Roberts unfortunately didn't actually get tape on. I just know he's a pretty explosive athlete that they'll probably mold into their vision, and the guy that could be seeing the field for them, because I don't think they're super deep on the interior D-line, maybe more of a project here. Then Jason Hines, massive lower body and has those 34-inch arms, a guy that can really create some vertical movement on combo blocks, and once he gets his hands inside on guys, they really have a tough time getting away from him in pass pro. And while he did allow 3 sacks last season, there were only 6 additional pressures across 255 pass blocking snaps, has subpar lateral movement skills in pass pro, I would say, to mirror those twitchy inside rushers, and he had a PFF grade of just 54.8 on snaps where he actually took true pass sets, so maybe more of a one-sided player, I would say, and he's dealt with some injuries as well. New England actually needed to really add depth here to the interior O-line, and I think Hines could see the field as a backup fairly early on if they suffer some injuries. If they stay with that vision of wanting to pound teams in the run game, he does make some sense here as a backup. And then Andrew Stuber does as well. First team All-Big Ten selection in 2021 at right tackle, allowing just 1 sack and 17 total pressures across nearly 700 pass blocking snaps these last 2 years combined. Somebody who's been super consistent in that area, just mirroring rushes and being able to keep the pocket clean. Kind of built like a fridge and has a pretty good understanding for angles and his assignments in the run game. His legs do deaden too much once he's established position in the run game and not really just driving through people. And there is some tightness in his hips, which limits his ability to really maximize his power. Along with the quicks to stay out of tackle, I don't think it's really quite there, so he's most likely going to be a pure guard at the next level. But very much a Patriot selection here. I think he'll also add depth to that front. Maybe he can kick out to right tackle in a pinch and be a backup for those 2 guard spots. So yeah, I didn't mind day 3 as much, and I can see a vision behind this class, but I just don't believe that they played the board accordingly, understanding where players found themselves among consensus rankings, and when they could have taken them. I could have certainly seen them take Strange and Thornton, be there for them a full round later each. I love those 2 undersized corners, but 2 more running backs and a limited backup in the 4th round, that's questionable for me. I broke all of this down in more detail in my full draft recap, which you can find on my page for footballtalk.com. But in short, They pick players a lot higher than I and probably the rest of the league would have valued them, and to me this was more so a draft to fill out the roster, rather than actually pick up true difference makers, which I believe they still really need to acquire here. And that brings us to a final team of the day in the New York Jets. As the second New York team with 2 selections in the top 20, having already talked about the Giants earlier this week, after they selected their quarterback of the future second overall last year in Zach Wilson. And they actually ended up making 4 of the first 36 picks in this draft, although the whole process ended for them already early in the 4th round. The 7 selections that they made, 3 in the first, 4th overall Sauce Gardner, cornerback Cincinnati, 10th overall Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, and then 26th overall Jermaine Johnson, the second edge defender out of Florida State. In the 2nd round, 36th overall Breece Hall, running back Iowa State. 3rd round, 101st overall Jeremy Ruckert, the tight end out of Ohio State. And then 2 4th rounders, 111th overall Max Mitchell, offensive tackle Louisiana, and 117th overall Michael Clemens, edge defender Texas A&M. First up here with Sauce, an impressive physical specimen with this gangly frame at 6'3", 190 pounds with 33.5-inch arms, and has that 4.41 speed. He actually never allowed a touchdown in his career and never allowed more than 13 yards in the game last season, so the track record is obviously incredible. Played a ton of press man, that ability to really disrupt receivers off the line and kind of mug them throughout the route, not let them get separation. But even if he does get caught leaning the wrong way, has that makeup space to get back into phase and make plays on the football. Doesn't shy away from getting involved in the run game, and also in zone coverage, does have some experience there and shows pretty good awareness overall. He is pretty high cut and might not quite be able to stick with those super quick NFL route runners necessarily. He can get caught overextending in pressure times and kind of compromise his position because of it. I think back to the 2020 matchup against Calvin Austin of Memphis actually, which I talked about a little bit in the AFC North breakdown with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just kind of missing off the line and having to get back there, make up on it and set the tackle instead of actually being able to stick with him in coverage. And Gardner is a bit more of a dive tackle at this point, but I do believe he's the cleanest cornerback prospect in his entire class and can be a true pressman shutdown type of corner. We've yet to see exactly how Robert Saleh wants to deploy him, but I guess we'll see him a lot on the boundary and kind of structure his defense away from him, since he's also gone away from the classic Seattle cover freestyle, which kind of would make a lot of sense for that too, but I actually think he's going to transform that defense to some degree, where I wasn't totally sure if cornerback was a priority just because of the scheme that they were running. A lot more zone, quarters, that kind of stuff that we saw in New York. And now you get a guy like him who you can really leave one-on-one at times against the ex-receiver of the opposing team and just slide the coverage almost away from him. So that'll be interesting to watch how exactly he'll be used. Then Wilson, one of the filthiest routes in college football, especially when you give him space to work and he can kind of make defenders run in circles. And he does have that 4.38 speed at the 40, which we saw at the combine and kind of surprised some people. We did see him get behind the defense a lot of times, but now you have it on track as well with the speed. Has crazy ability to stop and start after the catch with the ball in his hands. He doesn't shy away from contact either. Packs a pretty mean stiff arm and that ability to just drop his shoulder and go through contact. Just not being afraid, even though he is 6 foot flat and 183 pounds and has his issues getting cleanly off the line against bigger corners. Not really being challenged on the outside a whole lot. He has that kind of exhaustive setup of routes at times, which won't quite fly like that in the NFL. Maybe on the backside as the Z for that offense to some degree, but if you put him at X and you ask him to just stick his foot in the ground on the third step and run a slant route and stuff like that, just wanting to get the ball into his hands as the primary read and make things happen with it. I do believe he's one of the more complete receivers, but that is something that he's going to have to work on, his ability to be able to release off press cleanly. But he does have the route running acumen and the yards after catch skills to be that X receiver for the Mike LaFleur system, where he's going to see a heavy target share. And now with the other receivers, Elijah Moore, you can get him more in the slots and maybe at Z off the ball, as well as Corey Davis in that role. So that's going to be interesting to watch as well here. And then finally, Jermaine Johnson, the first, moved back up into that first round for a guy that I had in my top 10 personally. And there were rumors that they were actually targeting him with either one of the top 10 picks. And really, they only had to move back from an early to a late third round pick and give up a fifth in the process. So I didn't hate that value at all. Johnson, a former JUCO and Georgia transfer, who really broke out as the ACC defensive player in his only season at Florida State, has that Kondo-like 83-inch wingspan, gives you everything he has despite having to play 61 snaps a game last season, has a tremendous combination of speed and power, which you saw a lot of times overpowering blockers and especially at the Senior Bowl, just complete domination for 2 days straight. And then his agent probably called him and told him to pack his bags just because he had put enough on tape. And a question, why did it never really work out at Georgia? A lot of freak athletes there, but if you have a player like that, you'd expect him to have some production and get onto the field. He's often a tad bit late off the ball and needs to learn how to fluidly transition into a secondary move as a pass rusher, still try to hone in his craft. I was shocked that he still was there with how dominant he was during Senior Bowl practices and then his freakish combine performance. I think he and last year's free agent Kyle Lawson will be bookends for that solid defense at a position that has really been an issue for that organization well beyond that current regime there. So I really love that pick for them. One of my biggest steals here. Then with Breece Hall, a guy that they actually moved up a couple of spots for in a second to jump the Texans, who were rumored to be very interested in Hall, and they actually ultimately picked a running back, a different one in the early 100s. The Jets had to give up a fifth to the other New York team here, so maybe the value not great, but targeting a player that they really wanted and probably wouldn't have gotten 2 picks later. Hall is somebody who's had incredible production there at Iowa State, over 3,500 yards and 46 touchdowns from scrimmage over the last 2 years combined, has that 4.39 speed and a 40-inch vert, so also the best testing running back at the combine with good size that he brings to the table at 220 pounds or so, has that short area suddenness, that ability to approach the line in a very patient fashion and then kind of stick his foot in the ground, operate around trash and get into the open field. And then he has that innate ability to string moves together, as well as in the pass game, great awareness in space as a receiver, knowing where defenders are, even when he has to turn his back to them, and that ability to work around multiple ones. Sometimes I believe he just needs to hit the hole instead of trying to be patient. And in pass pro, he is kind of turning to midpoint rushes at times when there's 2 guys coming his way, and there is room for improvement with his step-up angles as well. So that's something that he's going to have to work on if he wants to stay on the field. I do realize that some people weren't the biggest fan of taking a running back this early, but I think he and Michael Carter Jr. will be a phenomenal duo, and they're going to be that for the next 3 years at least for less than $5 million a year. So not actually having to pay a running back, I don't mind those investments in terms of draft capital. Hall, an interesting fit here for an offense that wants to really string out runs and then stick their foot around in a one-cut type of system, not stopping his feet as much in the backfield or whatever. But I really like what those 2 guys can bring to the table with Carter, more so the receiving option and really needing that bigger guy in front of him, which makes a lot of sense here. Then Jeremy Ruckert, my number 4 tight end, and one of those guys that I actually thought could be a complete player at the position. This guy has a rocked up body and bad intentions in the run game, really driving his feet to create movement in that regard. He has very reliable hands, only dropping 1 of 40 catchable targets last season, and he becomes a freight train with the ball in his hands, just taking his head down, running through people. He was very underutilized at Ohio State just because of all the great receiving talent that they have there and kind of the offense not molded to really target the tight end position. That's why he only had just over 600 career receiving yards, and half of that came last season. Just very improving in that regard, and lacks that dynamic extra burst to really create separation out of his breaks. So with the Jets bringing in Z.J. Osama and Tyler Conklin this offseason already, kind of completely reformulating the tight end room, I think Ruckert could be the number 1 still for them, down the line at least. I know that Osama is actually a very underrated player himself, but Ruckert with that ability as a blocker could see the field very early, and then with the few touches as he gets, kind of impressing the coaching staff there, what he can do with it afterwards. Could see him be a big part of this offense right away, and certainly down the line as the future tight end. Then with Max Mitchell, super experienced guy, 37 career starts at both tackle spots combined, really brings those hips through contact and shows good upper body flexibility, particularly for that wide zone offense. He's so consistent with his pass sets and really understands the depth of the pocket, being able to just cut off angles and make it tough for people to work around him or go through him. He doesn't have overwhelming power at the point of attack, which is fine for that type of offense. You would certainly like to see him impose his will a little bit more, and the physical dimensions, barely cracking 300 pounds and only 33.5-inch arms. That is a bit underwhelming, so certainly not on the level that we have with Mekhi Becton, who we're talking about some of the issues that he has with weight control, but probably going to start at left tackle still for them. It's the plan at least right now, and just a very different body type, so I thought that was kind of funny. I don't think Mitchell will blow you away physically, but could start at right tackle actually, and with the way that he's flipped back and forth between sides in games and even some drives at times, he's an optimal swing option for them, and that's probably his best fit, while being able to fill in and get the job done for the most part. And then finally, Michael Clemens, a guy that more than doubled his career production this past season with 11 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. Can't just ragdoll tight ends when left one-on-one in the run game and consistently plays with his hair on fire. He's violent with that outside hand and just continues to work as a rusher while having the power to condense the edge and make it tough for quarterbacks to find lanes to step up into. His snap anticipation leaves him kind of a half step behind a lot of times, and he lacks any reliable counter as a pass rusher, as well as overall kind of predetermining his rushes at times to a negative capacity where he's not supernatural, maybe with adjusting on the fly and making things happen that way. But he's an all-gas, no-breaks kind of defensive end to add to that rotation, which all of a sudden now looks a lot better than it did a year ago, but he were really lacking in that regard. Really, all you have to know about this Jets draft class is that they ended up with 4 of my top 24 overall prospects, including my number 2 corner, my number 3 wide receiver, my number 3 edge defender, and my number 1 running back. Then on top of that, they might have found the starting tight end of the future, an excellent swing tackle, and kind of defensive end in that role as well, where he's going to be a heavy part of the rotation potentially. Those additions, combined with the Pro Bowl guard Laken Tomlinson that they brought in, 2 other tight ends, Carl Lawson being back, signing DJ Reed as that other corner and stuff like that, I think we'll see the Jets take a major step forward this season. Would I've liked to see them pick past the 4th round, considering the prime draft capital that they owned? Yes, because I believe in taking some shots on talented players late, but I can see all the guys that they did pick pretty much make a serious impact right away and help this team from a top 5 pick to making some noise as a young, talented squad, depending on what kind of jump Zach Wilson can make for them in year 2. And that also leads us to a divisional draft rankings, where I did go with the Jets at the top here, simply because of the talent that they acquired, even in comparison to the resources that are available to them. Yes, you shouldn't always be overconfident in your evaluations, but they do coincide with my rankings and consensus rankings where they made some really good moves, showing conviction and moving up for their guys, even if it did cost them the overall draft selections that they had. Getting 4 immediate impact starters, some guys at positions that they really needed to address and are going to make a huge difference this year. I think with some of the injuries that they suffered last season, whether it was to the quarterback position, running backs, offensive line, defensive line, it was kind of crazy, and I think we're going to see a big bounce back for them. A young, up-and-coming team to some degree, just because of Joe Douglas, the talent that he's brought in, and Robert Saleh and his coaching staff being certainly a competent one, even though last year, somewhat embarrassing probably for them, and they'll be ready to go, really excited to get back to work with all the talented players that they have there now. Then I went with the Buffalo Bills. Nothing that blew me away necessarily. I love Shakir in the 5th. I think he was a major steal, but addressing the 2 biggest areas of improvement with the number 2 outside corner and a dynamic playmaker out of the backfield in James Cook. The kind of moves, the depth that they added, the playmakers at those really important positions that they needed to address. That's why they are the Super Bowl favorites right now, because the roster that they have built up and what they've already shown, even though in the playoffs it hasn't quite worked out in the biggest moments against Kansas City. But I think they certainly have the pieces on offense and defense now to match Kansas City and beat them in the big moments to finally push them over the top in the AFC. Then the Miami Dolphins, like I said, not that much you can do with 4 draft picks, and you don't even select until the 100s. But love what they did in the undrafted free agent market as well. Thought the moves that they made here certainly made some sense. Not a ton of value other than Skylar Thompson. Very intriguing backup quarterback that they brought in there, but just comparing it to the New England Patriots, who are at number 4 here, just not really on board here with the value that they were able to acquire. Looking at my personal board and consensus boards, which obviously draft media can be wrong here, and those players might have been higher on other teams' boards, but still, I would be very surprised if they were this high actually, and I just thought throughout the draft, getting 2 running backs, back a quarterback in the 4th, there just were too many questionable moves for me to put them any higher than this. Not a ton of true difference makers necessarily for a team that lacks that dynamic ability. We saw it in the last 2 matchups with Buffalo when it wasn't a complete snowstorm. Just didn't have that type of talent to really match them here. Maybe we'll see a bit of a shift here in the way that they approach this schematically now with Josh McDaniels gone on offense and defensively as well. Getting those 2 undersized corners will be interesting to watch, but I just didn't agree with the value that the picks that they made. But that's going to be a wrap for the first half here actually of our divisional draft breakdown series, having talked about the North and East divisions in both conferences. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and let a couple of friends know who would like this kind of in-depth content especially now during the true off-season. The South and West regions are still ahead, so I hope that you want to hear from me again soon. As always, the link to my page helloswithfootballtalk.com for even more detailed breakdowns is in the video description, as well as my social media handles, which you can also see on the screen right now. If you got some time on your hands, why don't you just click the video at the top right corner, or save it for the next car ride or cooking session or whatever, if you want to listen to me some more. Hope to see you again soon. So until then, see you later. Peace!